This right here, my friends, is what we point out to when someone says, hey, I want a nice short anime that feels complete, satisfying, has some twists and turns, the characters are all developed. Basically, they want a damn near perfect anime. We point out Astra Lost in Space, damn it. This series honestly shouldn't have worked. It feels like everything that it went for, with the runtime that it was going for, it shouldn't work in theory, but that's just because we've been kind of diving into a lot of lackluster series throughout all the anime seasons over the years, where Astra, it knew how to pace its story. It knew that only a 5-volume manga is how much it needed to tell the story that it was aiming for. The anime studio knew it only needed 12 episodes, both the first and last episode to be double length, in order to pace and structure this series so that a very large cast of characters would all have their chance to immediately break the tropes that they were introduced as, and really flesh out and develop into interesting characters that by the time they reach back home to Astra, not only does it feel like a rewarding adventure, we even get to see years into the future and see how they would set off on their next journey, whether that be a path of music, a path of fashion and modeling, to being a king, to being an adventurer like Kanta always wanted. It felt like this episode was absolute payoff, and at multiple points throughout this episode, I literally had shivers going up my spine. The music production, completely on point, I have to say. The way the music would eat away at you when they were all really realizing that, holy shit, their trip home, it actually is going to happen. They were going to make it back home, and there was actually a good shot that the people responsible for everything here would actually be punished. It felt emotionally gripping, and not that cheap shit where they like, oh, here's a character you don't really care about, let's kill them off and try to invoke feelings. No, this was the rewarding feelings of emotions, where you were invested to these characters, their stories and their struggles, and you felt like, damn it, they earned the right to hug each other, to feel satisfied as if, holy shit, 140 some odd days in space, god damn it, they actually nailed it. And I love how they touched upon all the smaller details that they needed to cover up their tracks. I thought last week, given it one more episode, 20 minutes in length, they could probably wrap this up. Nope, they needed 40 minutes. They needed, I guess, 48 minutes technically, and god damn it, they used it to their full potential, covering up the whole history and secrets of Astra, which for a majority of it was all stuff we already kind of knew and realized about the wormholes and the original Earth being destroyed, them obviously moving to another planet. But there's obviously a big question. Why was it that only one character could really bring up this sabotage, and ultimately there's only two routes they could go? Memory manipulation, or the timeline was ultimately skewed, and as we see, they were about 100 years off. That when they transported over to Astra, they rolled the calendar back by 100 years so that they could ultimately play catch up and erase the history that they were ashamed of, which I actually have to say, it logically makes sense. If you basically announce to the world that, hey, we found a new planet to live on, it's pretty identical to Earth, a few years, Earth is going to be destroyed. We all have to transport, we design these wormholes, it's going to be very easy, we can build what we need to, transport it along, it's all going to work out. Yeah, naturally, human greed and just desires are going to take over, and there's going to be wars, there's going to be battles, and ultimately, half of humanity is going to be killed off. I honestly think if that was to happen, I could understand the shame and guilt that a majority of humans would have, that they would be willing to lie to their children so that generations down the line, the history and the truth would be completely swept under the rug past a couple of people in the higher-ups within a government, and obviously the king of the one section that was kind of guarding the secrets and was responsible for tearing down the wormholes, except one wormhole was left open. It really does feel like they logically covered their tracks in an elegant manner. It didn't feel kind of ham-fisted, half-assed. It actually felt like there was planning and structuring from the first chapter, the first episode, and that's why this connection made sense. It honestly feels like, yeah, you could ultimately, if you had to transport half of humanity to a new planet, and the government said, hey, we're now a unified nation, we are ashamed, no more wars, no more governments, and just basically separating humanity. Tear down the walls, we're all one nation. It would make sense that probably 75%, 90% would go along with lying to their kids, and those who didn't, well, there's ways to force people to say, hey, keep your mouth shut. So it's not surprising that within 100 years they could completely alter history to make it seem like they were always a part of Astra, and I felt like that was the most important thing they had to cover up, and it was really nice to see that Shars and just that conversation overall, it ended in a very satisfying note. so that as they were approaching home, that's where the real endgame could begin. And I love how they contacted Aries' mother and ultimately tied back to Ugar and basically his path of wanting to be a reporter, and how his brother had one police officer friend who was very trustworthy. And to see that reaction of ships approaching, them terrified, is this friend, is this foe, we have your host in custody, it was so inspiring. It felt like you were the parents watching these kids come home. That's how gripping it was. Even though we've only been following these characters for 12 weeks now, it really did feel like we went on a big adventure with them. We saw them at their lowest, we saw them at their highest. And I love how even after like they get back home and there's reporters being like, oh, you must have been starving. If you kind of look at it from the outside, Aries actually put on a few pounds. It doesn't look like it was a struggle. It looks like it was a vacation, but we know the hardship and we know the entire reason that kids were able to survive by themselves was because of the connection they formed. Yes, in a lot of ways, some of this was a vacation for them, but that connection, that childlike innocence was the entire reason that they were able to stay alive. And when things really went to shit, as characters lost an arm or there was a traitor in their ranks, the only reason they came out of that unscathed and that all of them could come back home was because the connection they formed was genuine and real. That's what I love about this show, is that a majority of questions were answered before we even went into this episode. So once the big answer of how they transported and basically altered history in such a way was answered, the remaining half of the episode was completely dedicated to them reaching home and just seeing the payoff of just where everyone's life would go. Aries and Kanta getting married, the singing career, the kingship, and just seeing that Shars and just the world in general tore down those walls really highlighted that even though you could understand, especially if basically half of your population was wiped out, you would want to create this fictional piece based on lies. However, chaos that's unfiltered is the right outcome. And I can't say I disagree with them. Obviously, if we were a part of that war and just humanity really going to shit, obviously we would probably side with a government saying we have to make it so the other generations, they don't know about this. However, when you're 100 years in the future, you can really see that, chaos sometimes is the right outcome because you want people to be able to make their own decisions and see the future through their own eyes, not eyes that are basically being forced on by a government or just manipulation behind the scenes. And that's what I really like. It feels like the people who deserve to be punished, they were punished, and the characters who deserve to set off on their own paths, they got that reward. Not everyone is going to want to go back into space and, set up the wormholes again, but the fact that Zack, Shars, and our boy Kanata set off on the Astra once again, modified obviously to make it fit for the current time period, but that same vessel that he used his book money to rebuy, it's like that's what you wanted to see. The idea of marriage and just the love and just how everyone ended up where they should have been and the connection they formed, it still mattered years down the line. It really felt like this was a group of family that even though they were born into a family that was raising them to basically be a vessel, and there was only one character with a true parent, which was Aries, they formed a true family, and that's why they could come off that ship not looking at this event as a negative, but as a positive, when they're all giving their highlights of what was their favorite point or the most memorable point, and the one that really stuck out to me was Kanta saying, this right here, us going home. It just gives me chills thinking about it. It really feels like this series is so memorable. And it's not memorable because it's bad or did things wrong. It's that everything I look at this, from the production, from the sound production to the visual production, I love the cinematic feel, and how when it had to get serious or when they were truly back home, it could get out of that widescreen and really fill the screen with just the beauty of their planet. It felt like this series got it all right. The voice actors, the casting overall was fantastic. Character designs really matched not only with the initial personality, but who they grew to be. And the story just connects so elegantly that you really want to point out to so many series and be like, man, I actually thought this series was pretty good back in the day. But now seeing how many, just things I was excusing because I was like, well, they had a lot of questions, so you kind of have to forgive a couple of the answers being a little shitty. No, damn it, in 12 episodes, this series had how many questions? And they all connected and made sense and felt like satisfying payoff. Very few anime, very few stories in general, even outside the medium that is anime, can go for something as expansive as this. Literally, we're going to how many planets, how many characters, and give everyone the chance to shine. And as it was said in this episode, without all of them together, if one of these people weren't a part of this crew, they wouldn't have got back home. Honestly, everyone was important at some way, shape, or form, even if it was singing to boost the morale and help people through their sickness. Everyone needed to be on this crew, and even though they were all put on this ship because they were supposed to be assassinated, the fault and the issue for their parents, if you even want to call them that, was that they put them all on that ship. Had they just been assassinated or sent off by themselves, not in one lump sum, they would have been killed. They would have been, basically, the plot would have been covered up. But because they were all on that ship, they were able to overcome all odds, and it logically makes sense that a bunch of kids were able to travel through space and reach back home. Some of the things you might want to highlight, Kitteri's sister, the only reason they uncovered they were clones was because they had identical DNA. Sure. However, if you really look at what Funi represented for the story, she did feel like an addition, an actual person. Okay, if it wasn't for Ugar and having his connection to his brother's police friend, they wouldn't have been able to expose this. Sure, you can nitpick and try to really say this was just for the plot, but it naturally wove in a human way. It actually felt like there was a connection. We knew about the brother. Obviously, the brother, who is a reporter, would have police friends. Makes sense. It doesn't feel like it comes from left field. Okay, these sisters, they actually grew and had emotional stories, so yeah, even though they were the reason that some of the DNA stuff came uncovered, that's fine. It's not like she was just there for that reason. It actually felt like she became her own person. This show understood character writing, and it understood plot progression. That's why this series works as well as it did. This episode, really, it only had to do two things. One, tie up the stuff with Earth and Astra, which they did in the first half. The second half, give us a satisfying payoff, whatever that had to be. And not only did they give us this stuff in the present, which mixture of comedy and dramatic, they also gave us a time skip to really make us feel like the adventure never really stops. For us, it does. The credits roll, you don't need to see more. We don't need more. These characters, we can understand where their paths and lives are going to go in the future, and that's all we need, but we know that their story is going to continue and that this world is finally going to have their eyes open to the truth and that everyone can live their life the way they see fit, both the good and the bad. That's why I love this show. This is why I've loved this show for 12 weeks. I can't believe I almost skipped out on this, and I was like, okay, let's give episode 1 a shot. Best decision I made all season. What did everyone think of Astra, the series overall, and just this episode, this double-length, meaty episode of a bad boy? What did you think? Let me know. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, and also hit that subscribe button if you happy new. So until next time, everyone, please take care. Have a good one.